St. Petersburg, a city that stands not merely as architecture, but as a frozen testament to Russia's pride, paranoia, and imperial myth. More than anything, this is Putin's personal fortress, the cradle of his rise, where he learned the mechanics of control, manipulation, and power that would define the modern Kremlin. For decades, while Moscow exported war to the trenches of Ukraine, the deserts of Syria, and the jungles of Africa, Putin believed that his homeland, his Venice of the North, was immune. But for months, Ukraine had been watching not only the battlefields, but the invisible arteries that sustain this empire. On October 21st, 2025, the illusion of invulnerability shattered. A deafening explosion tore through the railway linking Pskov and St. Petersburg, ripping apart the steel lifeline that fed Russia's northern war machine. The blast didn't just destroy a section of track, it obliterated Putin's belief in domestic safety. That moment marked a turning point. For the first time, the war had migrated deep inside Russia. The front line no longer lay on Ukraine's borders, but across the soil of the empire itself. How could one explosion cause such chaos across an empire spanning 11 time zones? Was it an isolated act or the start of a long, methodical campaign to collapse Russia from within? At dawn, maintenance crews patrolling the strategic corridor between Pskov and St. Petersburg discovered a hellish scene. A powerful charge had turned hundreds of meters of track into mangled wreckage, a professional act of military-grade sabotage. All rail traffic in both directions was immediately suspended. The results were catastrophic. Thousands of commuters were stranded at Moskovsky and Ladozhsky stations. Confused citizens queued in panic as loudspeakers blared cancellations. The war, distant and abstract until now, had finally entered their daily lives. But beneath the civilian chaos lay a far darker truth. This railway didn't merely move passengers, it carried the Russian army's lifeblood. Pskov is home to the 76th Guards Airborne Division, DV, one of the regime's most elite yet war-torn units. St. Petersburg, meanwhile, houses vast industrial hubs like the Kirov tank plant, ammunition factories, and Kronstadt, the base of Russia's Baltic Fleet. The railway between these cities was the artery linking industry to the battlefield, carrying ammunition, refitted tanks, and fresh troops. That October explosion severed the artery. Suddenly, supplies halted, troop movement froze, and the entire northwestern front was paralyzed. Worse still, the damage extended beyond logistics. The sabotage crippled Moscow's ability to defend the border with Finland and Estonia, NATO's newest members. The attack was not just tactical, it was strategic warfare at its most sophisticated. And it wasn't a one-time strike. Weeks earlier, another explosion had rocked the same line. This was no coincidence, it was proof of an ongoing, coordinated campaign. Ukraine's intelligence agency, the GUR, had identified the railway's vulnerability and would now exploit it relentlessly. But what truly terrifies the Kremlin isn't foreign drones or NATO missiles. It's its own citizens. Since the invasion began, partisan groups the Freedom of Russia, Legion, the Siberian Battalion, and Aish have been waging internal war against Putin's regime. These groups have evolved beyond raids. They've built sleeper cells inside Russia, networks of silent resistance ready to strike from within. For these partisans, railways are the perfect target, soft, vast, and vital. Russia's rail system spans 88,000 kilometers, wrapping the Earth twice. It is physically impossible to guard it all. The fact that the regime couldn't even protect a critical artery like Pskov St. Petersburg shows just how brittle the state truly is. At night, partisans strike quietly, burning signal boxes, derailing freight cars, jamming switches. Each act is small, but together they cripple an empire. Their greatest strength, however, isn't their weapons, it's the help of ordinary Russians. The Kremlin fears this truth most of all. It's the old villager who shelters saboteurs in the woods, the corrupt railway worker who leaks military schedules, the apathetic police officer who waves a suspicious vehicle through a checkpoint. Years of corruption, economic collapse, and moral decay have created a society that no longer fears the regime or even quietly aids its destruction. The home front has turned against itself. Putin's response? Panic disguised as control. The Kremlin handed sweeping new powers to the FSB and Rosgvardia, deploying armored patrols, surveillance towers, and rapid response units across the rail system. Yet these measures are futile. Most of Rosgvardia's elite are dead in Ukraine or stationed in Moscow to suppress potential uprisings. What remains are demoralized conscripts, untrained, unwilling, and unequipped. Russia's size, once its shield, has become its curse, a partisan's paradise. Ukraine now wields a new kind of power. Instead of sacrificing soldiers to breach entrenched front lines, it can strangle Russia's supply veins from within, thousands of kilometers away. The next likely targets, Moscow's railway hubs themselves. Should those fall, the capital and the front will both starve. Putin faces a fatal dilemma. Lose the war or lose the capital. The blast in Pskov didn't just cripple a railway, it cracked the armor of the Russian state. The empire is bleeding internally, its veins torn open by the very forces it created. But the implications extend far beyond Russia. That same explosion sent tremors through Beijing, shaking the foundations of Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. Those rails between Pskov and Petersburg weren't just Russia's military supply lines, they were part of the northern land bridge connecting China to Europe. The war had now reached China's trillion-dollar ambitions. For a decade, Moscow and Beijing sold the world on their shared dream, a land-based trade route immune to Western naval dominance. Russia's railways were the spine of this dream. They offered Chinese exporters a secure, fast corridor to Europe, bypassing U.S.-controlled sea routes. The keyword of this alliance was stability. The sabotage at Pskov shattered that illusion. Suddenly, Beijing realized it had entrusted its most valuable trade artery to a partner sliding towards civil unrest. Russia's once vaunted stability was gone, replaced by a regime that couldn't even protect its own infrastructure. Global insurers and logistics firms reacted instantly. Premiums for freight through Russia skyrocketed overnight. What was once a faster alternative to sea shipping became a high-risk war zone. Major corporations like BMW, Volkswagen, and Bosch began rerouting cargo. For Putin, this wasn't just a logistical crisis. It was a financial collapse. Billions in transit fees and foreign currency inflows vanished as Chinese freight began diverting elsewhere. Ukraine hadn't just derailed a train, it had derailed Russia's economy. Beijing's reaction was swift and pragmatic. Instead of waiting for Putin to regain control, China pivoted its investments toward the Middle Corridor, a route bypassing Russia entirely. This alternative path runs through Kazakhstan, across the Caspian Sea, then through Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey to reach Europe. Though geographically complex, it offers one priceless advantage: it is safe from Russian chaos. The Pskov sabotage, combined with countless prior attacks, convinced Beijing to redirect billions into upgrading Aktau port in Kazakhstan, Baku port in Azerbaijan, and expanding Turkey's railway links. This shift marks a strategic defeat for Moscow greater than any battlefield loss. Losing China's trust means losing not just revenue, but the very foundation of Russia's global relevance. As China withdraws, new alliances emerge. Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Kazakhstan form a rising Eurasian axis, one that operates without Moscow's shadow. Russia, once the indispensable bridge between continents, is becoming a geopolitical ghost, toxic even to its oldest allies. And the shockwaves don't end in Beijing. In Minsk, the explosion sent panic through Alexander Lukashenko's regime. Belarus's railways are tied directly to Russia's network, serving as another Belt and Road transit path. Lukashenko remembers too well how, in 2022, his own citizens sabotaged Russian supply lines to Ukraine. If Russia's FSB can't protect Pskov, how can Belarus's weakened KGB safeguard its routes? The fear of renewed internal resistance now looms large over Minsk, and so does the temptation to quietly distance from Moscow. For Belarus, the stakes are existential: lose transit revenues or risk becoming collateral in Russia's unraveling empire. Lukashenko may soon have no choice but to turn toward the West, seeking safety outside Putin's collapsing sphere. In the end, the October 21st explosion did far more than halt a train. It detonated the myth of Russian control, exposed the limits of Putin's friendship with China, and began Russia's slow erasure from Asia's economic map. By invading Ukraine, Putin burned the bridge to the west. Now, through his own failure to contain chaos, he's burning the last bridge to the east.